coming up. The state budget gets more than just a trim.
Somebody has to do it. It's a tough job.
I think he's doing his best to wreck the economy.
On the governor's chopping block, more than $1 billion in cuts.
Our budget was built from the bottom up.
Still in the budget, a full permanent fund dividend.
The proposed cuts are absolutely not backed up by analysis.
And so, yes, it's a day of reckoning.
Ahead, what the economic trade-offs could mean for Alaska's future.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. As the fallout from the governor's budget continues, there's a lot to take in. More than $1.5 billion in proposed cuts. Among them, more than $700 million in Medicaid. Education lost about 25% of its budget, about $321 million. And the university, about $134 million, more than 40% of its budget. Also $60 million in transportation, and that includes the state ferry system. Critics call it a slash and burn budget. Supporters, though, say it's long overdue. But for better or for worse, the governor definitely has the public's attention. Business is brisk here at Scott Tice's barbershop, tucked away in a corner of what is now called Midtown Mall.
Not many malls get a second chance or a second life, and this mall is definitely coming back around, so I feel good about it. I've been here 40 years.
Ever since REI opened, traffic is up at the mall, soon expected to pick up even more, with Carr's grocery store set to return and other new stores to follow. Signs Alaska's economy is on the rebound. But the governor's plans to make some of the deepest cuts ever has business owners like Scott Tice worried.
Cutting jobs at this point of the recession starting to eke out, not good.
Scott Tice wonders if it's time for a sales or income tax.
I mean, we've been riding the wave for 30-some years with no income tax, no sales tax here in Anchorage. And it's nice, but how long can we do that?
And pay a full dividend, which the governor plans to do. A big check, almost $3,000.
He's got a good plan. I agree with his plan. Somebody has to do it. It's a tough job.
Mike Short sets up businesses so they can accept credit cards. He says Dunleavy's drastic cuts will help the economy in the long run, and the full dividends will bring short-term gains.
In the business that I'm in, I see a big boost to the economy each year when that happens. And the last few years, there hasn't been any boost like that.
But most customers here disagree.
You know, thousands of people losing their jobs because, geez, we're getting a full PFD. To me, that's silly.
Other customers like Frank Wallace, now retired from the state, also questions the trade-off.
I think it'll be bad. It'll be bad for the overall effectiveness, overall efficiencies.
Frank is an information technology specialist in high demand during the pipeline days. Over the years, he says he's seen how budget cuts drive talent away, especially those to the university.
I'm not in favor of cutting that much. 40% is a lot.
I think he's doing his best to wreck the economy.
Dave Haley objects the most to the decision to cut the university.
His idea is cut, cut, cut.
Dave believes that students will look elsewhere to get their education.
You send them away to college, you don't always get them back. I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them went away to college and didn't come back.
That thought has crossed Asher Johnson's mind. He hopes when he's ready for college, UAA's aviation program will offer what he needs.
Like the program I want to go and do is good, then I'd stay.
All right, one more of these.
At the salon in another part of the mall,
all right,
some of the same fears.
It's interesting what you hear in a hair salon because we hear everything.
Cindy Pruitt has been with Regis for 31 years. And based on her experience, come dividend time, the more PFD dollars, the better.
When we get dividends, that's the largest month for our entire salon here in Anchorage.
The dividend brings in a lot of rural Alaskans to Anchorage.
That makes a big difference too. I mean, they're what helps us through when the economy's not doing great.
But if the budget cuts weaken the economy in rural Alaska and people need dividends to pay bills, what then? Sounds like it's a tough choice for you.
I think we have to compromise. I think the world today all want one thing or the other, but nobody wants to work together. So we have to figure out something that's going to still help everyone together. Are you happy with the darker color on your hair right now?
No matter how you cut it, none of the solutions to Alaska's budget crisis are attractive. And compromise is a style of politics rarely in fashion.
So we're hoping, we're crossing our fingers.
Up next, what the budget experts have to say about the proposed cuts, why they question the governor's plans. But first, more perspectives on the budget. Did Governor Mike Dunleavy arrive at a $1.6 billion spending cut? When low oil prices didn't generate enough revenue, he says he used these main principles to shape his budget. 1, revenue and spending must match. 2, the permanent fund dividend paid in full under the traditional formula. And number 3, no new taxes. ICER, the Institute of Social and Economic Research, says this plan could send the economy into a tailspin. Their rule of thumb, every $100 million in budget cuts translates into the loss of 1,000 jobs. So if the legislature allows this cut, Alaska could see 16,000 jobs disappear from the economy. But the governor doesn't see it that way.
This budget is going to impact all Alaskans. It's too massive not to. It's going to touch all Alaskans no matter where they live and no matter what they do.
The governor's bottom line, the state is at the edge of the fiscal cliff with no savings to turn to.
Putting off the problem until next year won't make it go away. Budgetary reserves are down to a level where they should only be used for emergencies. And asking Alaskans to contribute more money should not be an option.
Will the House please come to order?
Lawmakers have already begun to push back against the governor, and some worry that just his proposal alone could have a chilling effect on the state's economy. To learn more, we headed to the BP Energy Center, where a Commonwealth North study group meets on a regular basis. You'll find people like Cheryl Frasca, budget director for Frank Murkowski, a governor who made a lot of unpopular cuts to state government. Also in that group, Pat Galvin, revenue commissioner under Sarah Palin and Sean Parnell, and Gunnar Knapp, an economist for ICER. Will these budget cuts set our economy back?
Oh, absolutely. The question that's being asked is, are we willing to accept the impact to our economy that these budget cuts will have versus the impact to the economy that some other alternative would have to bring us to a balanced budget.
It's a reminder of how fragile our economy is because it relies on a revenue source that is volatile. And so, yeah, that should be a wake-up call. And we've been having this discussion for decades about the ups and downs of state revenues and state spending. And so, yes, it's a day of reckoning.
Is Cheryl right? Is this our day of reckoning?
It is absolutely, she's absolutely right. This is a day of reckoning. I am not in any sense minimizing the difficulty of the choices that we face. Okay, we face huge imbalance between our traditional sources of revenue and what we've been spending. But the options go beyond, therefore, let's slash everything until the balance is cut. The options for a rational discussion of this have to include, is the level of dividends that we're paying appropriate, and is the level of taxes, namely the lowest per capita of any other state, is that appropriate?
By pitting the dividend against government spending, you are putting the public in the position to make the selfish choice.
That is the root of the challenge facing the legislatures. How do we pay for the things that we want to do collectively? And what Governor Dunleavy is saying is, if you want to have your dividend, then you're going to have to do without a whole lot of things that we've been paying for collectively.
If I have 5 kids and I get $3,000 for each of those 5 kids plus my wife and myself, it's $21,000.
Let's talk about both what you're going to get and what you're going to give up. That it isn't simply just being able to give you your $3,000 or your family's $21,000. It's that we're going to make it so that you can't live in your community anymore. How is that a trade-off that you're willing to make?
I mean, do you think this is gamesmanship?
Well, I don't think anybody should be surprised, because it is what he said throughout his entire campaign. So it shouldn't be a surprise. The surprise is the specifics.
So is this a realistic proposal?
Oh, I don't believe so.
Is it realistic in terms of the legislature approving it? I would anticipate them to make changes. But there isn't more money to spend other than reducing the dividend. It's not like we have another savings account out there to tap unless they're going to use even more of their earnings and go above and beyond what the formula is that they approved last year.
Some would say that this is a very cruel budget.
What we're seeing with the proposal is a level of pain that we've never seen before as a state.
It's really crunch time, state spending for government and dividends, and they're out of whack.
I will admit that I was surprised by the university's proposed reduction. That is dramatic. We as Alaskans need to talk about what are our values for the future? What kind of a place do we want to leave to our kids?
My concern is not that we're going to have to make hard choices. My concern is that we need to properly frame the full range of choices we have. And how does all this fit in with the future Alaska that we want? And that is the real question. This is a lot of huge decisions. What kind of university do we want? What kind of schools do we want? What kind of health care do we want? What kind of social services do we want? What kind of transportation do we want? What kind of investment in infrastructure do we want? So if there was ever a time when sort of government needs to get down to work and citizens need to get involved and express their opinions, it is now.
Our budget was built from the bottom up.
The governor, though, believes that through the use of their dividends, citizens will be less dependent on government and more empowered.
The dividend allows people to plan their own programs individually, to take care of their own personal needs without government intervention.
The governor says his administration put a lot of thought into this budget and has designed a way to fundamentally change the role of government in Alaska for the better.
And we know that this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of the journey for this budget.
Well, the governor may write the budget, but the legislature has other ideas. When we come back, Larry Persily joins us to give us the lay of the political landscape. What makes this a journey into unchartered territory? The governor's budget perhaps had another impact after its release. The House immediately organized to form a bipartisan majority, a sign that the budget is far from a done deal. Well, joining us now to talk about the political side of the equation, Larry Persily, who's worn many hats over the years, worked for...
Polite way of saying I can't hold a job.
No, but you've had a broad perspective from working for several governors, Democrats, Republicans. So I just also a legislative aide working in finance. So the big question is here is, have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, no, we haven't. I mean, we certainly, the state in the 90s ran huge deficits when oil prices were down 40% in some years, couple years, 40% of the budget was covered out of savings. But we've never seen anyone come out and say, I'm going to shut down the ferries, I'm going to cut Medicaid spending, I'm going to talk about closing university campuses, I'm going to cut school funding. No, no one has ever proposed budget cuts on this level.
So put the legislature in the equation. Now, they've already started to push back. I mean, how likely is it that we're going to see this budget, this proposal, turn into reality?
It's impossible, I believe. It will never happen that every one of Governor Dunleavy's budget provisions, cuts, proposals, whatever you want to call them, make it into law. I don't think he believes it. Even he said, hey, this is a starting point.
So is it strategy to just kind of like, if I ask for a great big wampus giant cut, I'll get a bigger cut than I would have otherwise?
I don't know. I haven't talked to Governor Dunleavy or his budget director. I'm assuming that, I'll give them credit that they feel this is what they need to do, and they need to, I guess, get people talking. But yes, they believe in these cuts, most of these cuts. Certainly they would hope to have most of these cuts go through, but I don't even think most of them will go through the legislative process.
So do you believe that this is a day of reckoning, that we have no budget reserves? I mean, is this a real crisis or a manufactured one to some extent?
Well, it's manufactured, self-manufactured on two levels. The state of Alaska has been running deficit budgets for most of the past 30 years. This is not new. And people ignored it. Oh, oil will save us, prices will go up, I don't want to deal with reality. This has been coming. We did it to ourselves. Or we did it because we elected people who choose to ignore it, and we want to ignore it. And it's self-inflicted. If you pay a $3,100 dividend instead of the $1,600 we have this year, last October 2018, that's most of that $1.6 billion hole, as the governor talks about. So we self-inflicted it by not treating the disease for 30 years, and we made it worse, or the governor's made it worse by saying, I got to pay a dividend. That's job number one. Education, secondary.
Well, you know, a lot of lawmakers, you know, that supported tapping into the earnings to pay for government saw a lashback from the voters last time. So do you think they may think twice about trimming that proposed dividend back?
You know, there was some pushback from voters, but I don't think it was a majority. I guess, how do we know what 51% of Alaskans really want? Between gerrymandering and the way they've drawn political districts, you can't say, well, because this person won, that meant Alaskans don't want to give up a penny of their dividend. Certainly, Governor Dunleavy won, campaigned on giving out the full dividend. Doesn't mean it's the right policy call.
And he refers to it as a transfer, like something that we are entitled to receive.
Well, it's a transfer.
Even wants to give us back dividends that were cut.
Right, the back pay, as I call it. Right, Governor Dunleavy wants to give 3 years of back pay. Yes, it's a transfer. You take it from your permanent fund earnings checking account into the state general fund checking account, and then you transfer to Alaskans, but it still takes an appropriation from the legislature. The Supreme Court said that last year. So you can call it a transfer, but it's the same process.
Now, Cheryl Frasca, a budget director under Frank Murkowski, says that she does like one part of the proposal, the emphasis on privatizing government. And his budget director, Donna Arduin, is definitely looking at privatizing lots. I mean, she comes from the lower 48. She has a reputation for doing this. And she's already looking at corrections, the Alaska Psychiatric Institute, and the ferry, the marine ferry system as a big target here.
Privatization is a philosophical debate that's been going on in this country for a long time, with Republicans and conservatives on one side, Democrats, labor unions on another side. I guess I question where is the public served by taking an essential public service such as Alaska Psychiatric Institute or the ferry system, and instead of having public employees run it, contract with a private company that's going to make a profit, that is going to bring in people at lower wages and fewer benefits.
Well, the other thing too is in
Why?
some of these choices, they are constituencies that don't have the bigger population. Certainly inmates don't have a voice at all. The mentally ill, you know, they rarely have a voice or say in anything. And Southeast, which depends on the ferry system, they're a small population. Do you find something troubling about targeting those areas for
And it's good to see
privatization?
Senator Schauer from the Valley in the Senate Finance this week spoke up in support of the ferry system. I think legislators, many of them are looking at this and saying, hey, just because we have all the votes in the rail belt doesn't mean we should trash the rest of the state. So I think legislators are responding well to this. They're seeing, at least with the ferry system and some of the other issues, the inequality of majority rules in terms of majority gets first crack at the money.
So we're about out of time here, but I think everybody is wondering what this pushback is going to be, because the legislature could pass one budget and the governor could veto it if they don't make cuts as big as he wants. I mean, what do you foresee down the road?
I foresee the legislature and the governor will be talking about the budget well into June. Because you're right, they will not give him the budget he wants. If he vetoes it, then it comes back to the legislature. It takes 3/4 to override a veto. That's 45, and they can go line by line, veto by veto. Just a special session on veto overrides could go on a long time, and 45 out of 60 is a pretty high hurdle. We will be here in June talking about this, would be my guess.
You know, there is a lot of energy that's going to go into this. This is going to be just this big tempest that will go on for
Right,
months.
and a lot of sincere energy. People think they're doing the right things.
Is this a waste of energy? I mean, is there a better way to do this?
Well, a better way. We should have dealt with it long ago. Look, I think there's going to be a lot of energy, well-meaning, but I don't think you can solve this if you say, I'm not going to talk about reducing the dividend to something we can afford, and I'm not going to talk about taxes. What the governor is saying is, can't talk about smaller dividend, can't talk about taxes, all you can do is talk about cutting services.
And what about the federal money we might lose because of the matching system?
Right, as Senator Murkowski pointed out to Alaskans this week, it's a little hard for her and the rest of the delegation to go to their colleagues in Congress and say we need money for Alaska programs when the other 432 members of Congress, or 532, say, wait, you have 60-some billion in savings, you don't tax yourself, you're handing out 3,000. I'm not going to give you money. So she's right, it makes it harder.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very personally. Well, before we leave you, we want to thank you and those of you who took time to send us your comments, especially for those long and thoughtful emails that we got. Look for some of these to appear online. It's an important conversation. We want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.